Hello, honeys. Welcome to a brand new Beesness. We've got all kinds of headlines for you this week. But first, one quick little reminder announcement. Our honey drop for August is now up on our Ko-fi and our Patreon pages. Those are spelled K-O-F-I and P-A-T-R-E-O-N, respectively. If you go to the Highbrow Honey pages on either of those websites, you can find some brand new exclusive content from us. And now on to the good stuff, your handpicked headlines for the week, curated by yours truly. We've got an especially important follow-up this week, the escalation of a situation we touched on last. The Noguchi Museum of New York City has now officially terminated 4 workers for wearing keffiyehs. For a more in-depth recap of the situation, please see last week's Beesness, but bare minimum here. As far back as early August, this keffiyeh ban was put into place and employees began protesting it almost right away. The staff said that this policy would, quote, bring shame to the legacy of Isamu Noguchi, end quote, the artist whom the museum is named after. And they also argued that this call to end Israel's bombardment of Gaza is a humanitarian rather than a political cause. So this policy, in their eyes, is nothing but a slippery slope for calling things incendiary and policing employee dress. Said one employee, quote, it's one thing if I showed up to work wearing Kamala Harris pins. That would be political, end quote. Museum leadership has continuously tried to diffuse this situation by referring to the ban as, according to today's sources, a dress code update prohibiting so-called political dress that could make visitors feel unsafe or uncomfortable. This set the stage of the firing of 4 workers, 3 gallery attendants who said they would not comply with the policy. The 4th was the director of Visitor Services, who was also terminated during the fallout of the policy announcement. And so the Sunday before this, September 8th, 60-plus protesters, including former workers, demonstrated outside the museum, handing out flyers to inform visitors of the ban. This action was held concurrently with a performance inside the galleries by musician Alex Zhang Hongtai, who wore a keffiyeh in solidarity with workers. These protests also included the demanding of the removal of director Amy Howe. So what now? Although a museum statement from late August said that they understand the intentions behind wearing the garment is expression of personal views, but still these expressions can unintentionally alienate segments of their visitorship, their audiences. And Hyperallergic's most recent requests for comments have been met with the spokesperson's responses that the Noguchi Museum cannot comment on personnel matters. It is notable, however, that 2 current Noguchi employees, speaking anonymously out of fear of professional backlash, discussed a shattered workplace morale. They say the policy has caused, quote, frustration, emotional exhaustion, and a sense of powerlessness among the staff, end quote. We have mentioned before, it's worth mentioning again, that part of these frustrations have to do with the unequal or reckless seeming applications of this new dress code. For example, one worker was sent home for wearing a black and white scarf that resembled a keffiyeh but did not depict its traditional fishnet pattern. Another instance, one of the first to get so-called dress coded was a black employee, although others had worn the garment before. So why we care, honeys, why we're continuously talking about this very weighty subject, even though I know it's politically alienating, in part because of the escalation of this situation, how far this is really going, that this internal divisiveness is leading to people's loss of jobs. We also found this update worth sharing because of the divisiveness around the fact of the protests themselves. For example, on one hand, we have Riki Ejima, a 4th-generation Japanese-American who used a quote from Noguchi in her protest speech, describing museums as, quote, a repository against time, end quote. In her own words, quote, if this museum wants to live up to its ideals of honoring Noguchi's legacy and serving the global public, it must respect and affirm its workers' rights and ultimately the rights of the Palestinian people, end quote. We find the counterpoint to Ejima and her perspective in a man named Tom. He disagreed with the protesters' views, believing that museums are places of escape. He said, quote, bringing politics into them is a mistake, end quote. Even though I personally disagree with him, I have to give him credit. He did say that no one could claim to know what Noguchi would have done in this moment, especially as, he pointed out, the artist once designed a sculpture garden for the Israel Museum in Jerusalem. Said another passerby very practically, quote, "If any business wants to live and survive in New York City, which should be a beacon of personal and political and cultural expression, you can't ban someone's dress. That's ridiculous." End quote. Last week also saw damage caused to Rome's famous Arch of Constantine in a lightning strike. The work in question is part of one of the last great monuments of Imperial Rome, erected around 315 CE next to the Colosseum to commemorate Emperor Constantine's rise to power. A bit more specifically, for my fellow history nerds out there, it was put up after defeating Maxentius in the Battle of the Milvian Bridge. This victory was important because it led to the end of the Roman persecution of Christianity. It totally reversed religious norms of the day, bringing Christianity to prominence in the empire under Constantine's rule. But this lightning strike during the storm on September 3rd knocked it straight on down. This story is included today because it's kind of fascinating. It tells us a little bit about the weather event itself. It was described by Italian news site ANSA as a water bomb because it reportedly didn't show up on any weather forecasts before hitting Rome's historic center, causing flooding and damage throughout the city. Thankfully, this is a relatively quick fix. Due to ongoing restoration on that facade, existing scaffolding allowed maintenance workers to quickly remove other stray fragments, debris from the strike zone, and stabilize the area. Italian cultural authorities have added that repair to the list of restorations to be made at a later date. We also were made aware last week that despite rejections of these plans by heritage experts, modernization of some of Notre Dame's stained glass windows will move ahead. French President Emmanuel Macron is behind this big push to replace some of the historic windows with contemporary designs, at least for 6 chapels on the south side of the cathedral's nave. A slight important detail, the windows in question are not originals from the 12th century, but instead were created by 19th century architect Eugene Viollet-le-Duc as part of a restoration project that took part in that time. The official and unanimous rejection to the proposal came from France's National Commission for Heritage and Architecture in July, yet still very, very recently, the French Ministry of Culture announced 8 finalists to design these new stained glass windows. The names of these finalists will be announced by the grand reopening this December by both Macron and the Archbishop of Paris, Laurent Ulrich. You may remember that the cathedral was closed because of the famous 2019 fire. So, honeys, why do we care? Per the art newspaper's Vincent notes, some experts and historians believe that this new plan goes against the spirit of the 1964 Venice Charter on the Arts, an international agreement which states, quote, "Items of sculpture, painting, or decoration which form an integral part of a monument may only be removed if this is the sole means of ensuring their preservation," end quote. It goes on to say, quote, "The valid contributions of all periods to the building of a monument must be respected," end quote. So this is a big deal because it's such a famous monument to go against this agreement. And France, or its government, is such a huge player historically in international arts. That's a big deal that they are disregarding this. That's especially true because in light of the commission's words, finalist Pascal Convert withdrew his bid from the competition earlier this summer. So this really strong rejection coming from involved artists as well as cultural forces is worth noting. We also care because Notre Dame is now one of 2 major Parisian monuments to receive headline attention for controversial potential new additions just within this month. The other headline, plans to make the Olympic rings on the Eiffel Tower permanent fixtures, announced by Paris Mayor Anne Hidalgo. No further word has been given on the latter situation. We saw Banksy in the news again as his Girl with Balloon painting was stolen, found, and the thieves were charged all within a week. Probably the British street artist's most iconic paintings, the first version appeared in London's Shoreditch neighborhood in 2002. It features a young girl reaching for a red heart-shaped balloon. Another version of this same work was very famously, in 2018, shredded on stage by a mechanism hidden within its frame just seconds after it sold for $1.4 million during a Sotheby's auction. In case you wondered, that one was retitled Love is in the Bin and sold in 2021 2021 for $25.3 million at Sotheby's London. The version in question, however, was stolen from Grove Gallery on New Cavendish Street in central London last week. Police said on Friday 2 men have been charged. The BBC reports that the gallery had just closed an exhibition of works the day before the heist, September 7th, worth a total of over $2 million, yet this was the only one taken. The investigation was done by the force's Flying Squad, which combats serious and organized crime. That's not too important, I just really like the name. And the suspects are Larry Fraser, 47, from East London, and James Love, 53, from Essex. Both were charged with non-residential burglary and placed in police custody on Thursday. They've appeared in court once already for bail determination, but will go back next month for more trial detailed stuff. London police have said the work was recovered and will be returned to the gallery. Last week also saw the forced closure of Amsterdam's Rijksmuseum. The arts institution was blockaded by climate protesters from the Extinction Rebellion, or XR, group on Saturday. They set off yellow smoke bombs outside and chained some of themselves to the entry fences, forcing the museum to shut until further notice. The museum later stated that it closed to protect the visitor staff and artworks inside. Wearing yellow jumpsuits and face masks, the XR activists demanded the Rijksmuseum cut ties with its main sponsor, the Dutch multinational bank ING Group. According to XR, the bank finances projects contributing to climate change, so this is kind of fascinating to see the range of responses to the event of the protest and the whys behind the protesting as it was reported in the press. One XR representative told the Dutch news agency ANP, quote, "It's incomprehensible that the Rijksmuseum can allow itself to be financed by ING, the largest financial driver of the climate crisis," end quote. The group accuses the museum of enabling a major polluter to, quote, "hide its face behind famous works of art from Dutch history," end quote. Police reported the arrest of 33 XR protesters, mostly those who had chained themselves to fences, and that the police had moved them to a different location. A spokesperson for the local police said that the protesters were given the chance to demonstrate in Amsterdam's largest square, the Museum Plain, but the activists refused. ING, for their part, responded by telling XR to address the bank directly. So why we care? Several museums and artworks around the world have been targeted by climate protesters over the years. You've heard it before in the Beesness, you'll likely hear it again. This is yet another example of how the issues of our day get talked about, acted on, and dealt with in the arts world. And one very last one, a bit of a shout out to my dad. One particular classic rock band's long-last film, directed by an Oscar winner, is coming to theaters. The film in question, Tom Petty, Heartbreakers Beach Party. Originally released in 1983 on MTV, it only aired once. It's never even been officially released as a VHS, DVD, or theatrical film, yet it still has a bit of a cult following among serious Petty fans. The film reportedly influenced Rob Reiner's mockumentary, This Is Spinal Tap. The Oscar-winning director in question is Cameron Crowe, who began his career as a Rolling Stone journalist covering rock bands like Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers before moving into film with successes like Fast Times at Ridgemont High, Jerry Maguire, Say Anything, and Almost Famous. Unfortunately, theaters showing Tom Petty Heartbreakers Beach Party appear to be limited to New York. They include Regal Destiny USA in Syracuse, Movie Tavern in Camillus, and the Regal Ithaca Mall. More info to be found at tompettyfilm.com. And that is our Beesness for the week, honeys. Hope you've enjoyed. Hope you are taking care, enjoying our slight but sure transition into fall. We're no longer in the hundreds in Phoenix. I'm very grateful for it as we have started doing our rugby fitness. And I'll tell you, running hundreds of meters in 100-degree heat, pretty brutal. Anyways, though, take care of yourselves, and we'll talk again next week. This podcast and this episode were created, produced, hosted, and researched, as well as fact-checked by yours truly, Celia Bugno. It was edited by our brand new sound engineer and producer of our intro music, Chris Meinhold. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe on all of your favorite streaming platforms, as well as your social medias.